Welcome, esteemed panelists. It's a pleasure to have you all here today. Just as a bit of background, I might just begin by saying I think over this conversation, and we might as well just address it to begin with, is the great proletarian cultural revolution, which essentially runs between 1966 and 1976 in mainland China. Although its dates aren't quite as firm as that, I think the effects of the Cultural Revolution were felt before and after that period, as the tensions in China increased through the 1960s, and also the recovery period extended out for a number of years. The Cultural Revolution was intended to purge society of capitalist elements and particularly targeted intellectuals through young cadres of Red Guards, and began quite aggressively in the cities, and particularly in Beijing. 1966, 1967, the first years of the Cultural Revolution saw a lot of violence in the cities against intellectuals, as Red Guards denounced them, and young urbanites soon after, I think, beginning about 1967, 1968, began to be sent down to the countryside where they were to learn more about life from the peasantry. In general, we'll be speaking about the fourth generation and the fifth generation. These are very fluid brackets, and I hope we'll get to discuss that a little bit more today. Many of the filmmakers actually resist these labels, and of course, nobody wants to be completely defined in these ways. However, there are certain characteristics. When we speak of the fourth generation, we speak about the last generation of filmmakers trained at the Beijing Film Academy, in particular, whose careers were cut off at their very beginning and had to be reignited later after the end of the Cultural Revolution, and are most notable for the so-called scar films, which in the 1980s and early 1990s, which addressed the human stories during the Cultural Revolution. The fifth generation is normally associated with filmmakers trained in the Beijing Film Academy following the Cultural Revolution, and includes some of the most notable Chinese filmmakers in the world, including our friend Chen, but also Zhang Yimou and Qian Zhuangzhuang. Their films are more associated with period epics, bold cinematography, and hosts of international prizes, so they all seem to have won. Plus a rather interesting take on history itself. Sort of a look back to 1949 and even further back, in perhaps a more critical light than the generations before them. But I'm looking forward to us getting into how we actually might even go further in that. I think we'll start with Sheifei. You are associated with the fourth generation, and I'd love for you just to paint us a picture maybe of your life and life at the Beijing Film Academy in the 1960s and what happened at the dawn of the Cultural Revolution.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I try my best in English because when I studied in high school and the university at that time, everybody learns Russian language. But no, forget it. I think in mid of 80s in China, some history and some critics give a fifth generation title for them. Why in China, filmmakers divided a lot of generations? I think last century in China have a big change time, have two very big history turning point, before and after liberation, before and after Cultural Revolution. If a filmmaker, you live, you study, you grow up in different period, you must control with that time. For me, as a fourth generation, I study primary school, high school, Beijing Film Academy in socialism time. I into Beijing Film Academy directing department is 1960. To 1965. I just graduated. I become a teacher. Not too much time, and just half years, Cultural Revolution began. That time, we trained us 5 years only system from Russia for JIC film. They have a professor go to our country training our professors. You know, that's almost 30 years. We never saw some new film from America. Just the film from socialism country, from Russia, Eastern Europe, and some film from Italy. New realism, very strong influence us. For fifth generation, they get college education after Cultural Revolution. This is why generations very different. For my teachers, it's the third generation. They, like Kaige's fathers, they get education before liberation. Yeah, before 49. His father studied in drama school. Yeah, that times. This is why, for me, as after begins Cultural Revolution, that time I just 23 years old. Because I'm family is revolution family, I'm become a Red Guard. 2 or 3 years, I go to everywhere. I go to 3 film studio, give their speech, revolution speech, ask them doing revolution movement. After that, we go to countryside. Since 1970 to 75, I'm as all teachers and students go to Hebei province's Biqiang Lake as a labor, and same time doing revolution movement too. After that, finish Cultural Revolution, I become teachers. This is a different experience. After tomorrow, we will show you my film is a woman from the lake of scented souls. That location is we labor's location. All teachers and students live in that Biqiang Lake for 5 years. Every day we printed rice and live with farmers same times.
So for that period, you didn't touch a camera, didn't engage in cinema at all?
No. During Cultural Revolution, 10 years, 3 years, no any films made it. After that, have some revolution, Beijing Opera Revolution films. In end of the Cultural Revolution, 3 years, I come back Beijing as an assistant director, shooting Beijing Opera, Chairman Madame Mao's film. That's his father. His father is a director. I'm an assistant. I live with his father. His father is my teacher too. Yeah, third generation. He told me a lot about his study in drama school before liberation. He learned a lot of Western drama series. I never learned it. But this is why. It's because China situation different, totally different time. If you live here, you must have these times something.
Thank you. It's amazing the interconnection between the two of you. It's quite astonishing.
What was the name of the film? Was it Taking Tiger Mountain?
The
film that you made under Chen Kaige's dad.
It's Haixia.
Haixia, it's a story about a young fisherwoman.
Yeah, it's about go as a soldier. It's
and she
Haixia.
started as a fisherwoman and then grown to be a revolutionary soldier.
Another 就是杜鹃神, I can say it. Beijing Opera, another.
Well, they're called revolutionary model operas.
Yeah, model.
During the interruption in film production in China, Madame Mao worked with theater groups to devise the correct form and themes, right, of these operas. And I think only 4 of them were finally completed, and then those would become the matter for making films. So when filmmaking was resumed about 1969, there were only these models and only very few films were made. So you were very lucky to get a chance to work.
In fact, these films are fascinating, and in fact, we have a proto version of them, which is called "The East Is Red," which we struck a new print of in collaboration with the China Film Archive, which we'll be showing here. And also was shown extensively during the period. Chen Kaige, I'm going to turn to you now for a few minutes. Maybe you want to walk us through, as CFA has done, you're growing up, you're a young person during Cultural Revolution, and then what it was like to be the first group back in Beijing Film Academy and being taught by teachers like CFA who had gone through this period.
Well, I mean, I don't know what to say. I mean, the fact is that, I was the first year student of middle school in Beijing when Cultural Revolution broke out. That means that, I actually haven't received any serious education, because my father was a film director that is a very dangerous professor. I must say that, I mean, then he's soon being put, it's not really being put into jail, but close enough, he suffered, during the Cultural Revolution and being sent to the countryside to labor there and so on and so forth. I was
re-education.
Re-education, yes. And myself, like, other people in my generation, being sent to the country. I guess that Chairman Mao, the reason why he called on the young people to go to the countryside, he said that those, young students that need to have the a chance to receive the education from Chinese peasants, But I guess that's wrong, he just tried to find a way to resolve the social problems because it's dangerous. If the whole generation of young people just gathering in the big cities, without jobs, there could be a chaos, right? The whole schools, being closed at that time. But I stay in the countryside, but it's a remote province called Yunnan province that is very close to the border of Laos and Vietnam. That I was there for 2.5 years, before I joined the army. Then I was in the army for 5 years. I can't believe that I was there so long. But one of the reasons that I was picked up by the army, is because of because it's honor. If you could have joined the PLA to become the soldier of PLA, at that time, because I could have played basketball. I was a good player. So they just say, hey, you should stay one more year, and so. I stayed in the army for 5 years. It's a long period of time. That before I moved back to Beijing, that I became a worker of Beijing Lab. The
where film was
developing
processed.
Factory. Yeah, I was in charge of the air conditioning. For 3 years, before I became the student of Beijing Film Academy. Then I remember that, because this is very casual talk, I can tell stories. The first time that I met with one of the professors, that he asked me a question that I try my best to answer. The next day that I received a letter from him, said, "You're out." He said, "You're out?" I was very confused. Then at the end of the day that I became the student, I asked him that why, you kicked me out. And he said, "How dare you answer my question?" I said, "What are you talking about? You asked me to answer your question." I said that if you didn't answer the question, that means that there's a need for you to learn from me. But
this wasn't Professor Xie-Fei, right?
No. Well, anyway, so you see that, more than, that's right after Cultural Revolution in the year of 1978, more than 3,000 young people apply for the directing department of Beijing Film Academy. But at the end of the day, only 28 men and women being accepted by the school. So we knew actually, what we want to do, because we're just really sick of the movies that we have seen during the Cultural Revolution. Those propaganda films, that kind of thing. So we want to create something differently. By first of all, learning from Professor Xie and another group of teachers who are very open-minded, just taught us, what to do. And basically, what we were very much impressed, by what they taught us is that, movie is something to see. You have to see the film with your eyes and forget about dialogues. Too many lines there. You try your best to make sure that, people could visually to understand your film. To see something, interesting in the film. So that's why, if you watch my first film, Yellow Earth, you will realize that, and, that's really having a great impact on us, that, a few lines that you could hear, in the film. I think we had a wonderful time, because that, the school is in the suburb of Beijing. It's not really in the center of the city. So we feel like, we start to enjoy the life, in the countryside again. It's become every day that we just watch films, having lessons from teachers, and then we had a free discussion, after we saw those classical films, in the film archive. We went to the film archive at least, twice or three times, per week. So we have seen a lot of good films there, then that's wonderful time that we had.
So you were seeing different films than Xie-Fei's generation would have seen, not just sort of Soviet films and occasional Italian neorealism. You're going back to the pre-1949 films, and were you seeing American films too?
Yes, but we have seen those American classical films made in the 30s and 40s.
At that time, just some new film come as it's very popular in fifth generation students like Dustin Hoffman's Graduate.
Graduate, okay.
About all that jazz.
All that jazz?
Yeah, something as a grandfather.
Okay.
Yeah, something very popular.
Huh. Fascinating.
That would be The Godfather?
Godfather.
Godfather, yes.
I was like...
Godfather.
Fantastic. Thank you. Bart, Testa, you've been studying this field for some time, and the cloud of the Cultural Revolution, how it affects Chinese cinema. Just from a scholar's perspective, as you enter this field of study, as you start to think about the dislocations and the differences between the fourth and fifth generation filmmakers, what are the primary themes that come to mind? What are the primary ideas that you think live between these two generations?
First, a prelude.
Please.
I'd like to quote or paraphrase a critic whom I admire. Her name is Berenice Renaud, and she says, "Chinese cinema remains an uncharted sea. Only a few islands have come into view." And partly it's our perception, but I think this perception is shared by Chinese people. I teach a fair number of Chinese students from the mainland who are at the University of Toronto, and they don't know their cinema heritage either. So there's a lot of work to be done. The first thing I would remark is that the Chinese cinema from 1949 up until the Cultural Revolution was not sailing on an even keel. Filmmakers tried to stay within the ever-changing lines of what was ideologically permissible. And one of the happy consequences of this was that the initial imposition of Soviet-style socialist realism, which China basically imported from the Soviet Union when they were all buddies together, which didn't really live to the end of the 1950s, the Chinese artists, filmmakers, actors, and screenwriters began to, let's say, massage that imposed style, right? But sometimes got themselves into trouble and controversy. So it was always a dangerous world to be a filmmaker. But the Cultural Revolution was much worse because it just stopped everything. Now, the question I really have about the fourth generation, there are a couple of questions that I really need to be answered as if I were a sophomore, second year university student. The first thing is that you go to this prestigious, important institution, spend 4 years there, and then basically you have to spend the rest of the decade of your youth digging potatoes. Right? And so I want to ask about the bitterness that might have produced or not, okay? And what kinds of films does one make after that experience? And do you feel connected to the Chinese films that came before, or do you feel completely cut off? Now, that's a question for you, for the fourth generation, because my own feeling and questions about the fifth generation are a bit different. First of all, I do feel when one sees the films of the fifth generation, the first films, especially a film like Yellow Earth, that there is a conscious, passionate decision to break ranks with what came before, right? As much as Jean-Luc Godard breaks ranks when he makes Breathless, or Antonioni breaks ranks when he makes L'Avventura. And I think the reason why the films of Chen Kaige, and particularly Yellow Earth, when it appears internationally, and when it appears internationally, it is saved from oblivion, okay, in China. It has the impact it does because critics and then audiences recognize that is a major fracture or break and something new, like other films that, in a sense, are world historical film events, like the ones I mentioned before. So my first question is really about the fourth generation and their feeling, right, when they finally got back to work. Did they feel desperate? Did they feel relieved? Did they feel in continuity or not? May I ask?
Let's address those now. So, Xie to paraphrase, perhaps there's this break occurs, this 10 years where you're not able to practice your profession. What impact does that have on the filmmaking to follow? Are you looking at that at that 10 years as the sort of formative influence on these films, or are you actually looking before the film history that occurred?
Do you feel that you can resume what you were trained to do, or did you feel compelled to forcefully break away from it? Now, as the teacher of the fifth generation, this is an important question for you at the time, I'm sure.
Yeah, thank you. I always say us, fourth generation is a change generation. We need the 80s, we call that time is a golden time. That time just opened the door, a lot of new film, no idea, new book, everything come. We learn with students together, not us teach them, we together learning. Because first, I directed 9 films, only 9 films. First 2 films, same classical propaganda film. Because I'm as an assistant director doing 2 films, revolution model films. After that, I doing some. My first and second film is, forget it. I never show film for students. About classical boy against the Kuomintang and something. But we need to learn. I think for me, it's very important. I learn a lot of new things. I learned something from young generation. Especially in 1986, I go to USC as a business scholar. 1 year, I changed my mind. I know what is art, what is good film. Film about human being, about humanity. That is why when I come back to China, I choose these two films, Black Snow and Woman from the Lake of Souls. I think art films, very important. You must focus on real life, focus on Chinese real people, about their life, their fate, their experience. This is why our generation all need learning, all need change. We need to take off all the socialism, some very strong influence. That time teach us film and art is propaganda tools. But now we know that. But fifth generation, much because they meet good time. They appear in mid of 80s, 1 and 8 years appear. Very shock for us.
Big shock.
Yeah, big shock for us. We learn a lot from them. But good things is when China market become to commercial very much today, we don't need the work now. Right. We just teach it because the fifth generation need to change them from art to go to commercial. They need a medal of commercial for market films. I don't like that because I teach it. This is a different generation. Okay.
Thank you. And Kaige, so the this idea of a radical break, that you're seeing what's around you, and I think you've alluded to this to a certain extent also, that that this, I think your phrase was breaking ranks with the past of Chinese cinema, Bart.
Yeah, a kind of rupture or break. I'd like to supplement that question before you answer it. What is so amazing to critics who deal with Yellow Earth, and when we hear the anecdotes and the stories now, is that here is a film of consummate sophistication. It's intellectually and astonishingly sophisticated work, with poetic allusions and so on, made by someone you now tell us didn't finish high school. What happened to you to make you such a great poet? And I know the film was carefully, I know that the pre-production was elaborate. It is a kind of, it's almost like a graduating film for your whole generation of filmmakers. Zhang Yimou is the cinematographer, but the writers and other people involved. But what happened that made a poet of this kind of caliber, which the Chinese critics didn't know what to make of it. They debated it for 2 years. Hong Kong did what Hong Kong did. It put it on the screen and made it a hit. But since then, critics who've spoken about this film go over it in almost Talmudic attention. And so the question I like, how did such a masterpiece come so very early from this group of people?
Well, I mean, although that I didn't, finish my study in middle school, but I was strongly influenced by the Chinese classical poetry. And of course that my parents always asked me to read more books. So at the same time that I read, because the fifth generation directors in China is slightly different from other generations, because that we experience the real life, which is Cultural Revolution. So you probably could learn more from the bitterness and hardship than the peaceful life. For example, that when I was in the countryside, our job was very dirty, which is that to chop the trees, in order to plant rubber trees. It's like killing, because that we live in a jungle. We kill trees every day, there's a pain always in our heart that we don't know why we're doing this, this kind of thing. But it's really hard to tell you what I felt at that time about the life and the world. So I stayed in the countryside for 2.5 years, without going back to Beijing to see my parents there. But it's how hard it is. But you feel like you grew up, and there's some energies, just being seen inside of you. You could feel like that, And then the time is coming that I became the student of Beijing Film Academy, which is how wonderful it is. I was very excited. But it's, why I want to go to the Beijing Film Academy? Not because I want to be a student, then eventually make myself a film director. Because, if you went to the Beijing Film Academy, you didn't need to pass the regular examinations. Because, I told you guys that I never really received education in the middle school. Then how can I pass the examinations to become the student of university? I can't do that. I don't know why. I fully understand your question, but I have no idea that why I couldn't make Yellow Earth. Maybe because, Zhang Yimou and the group of people and myself that traveled to that period, that area. We have seen Yellow River there, and Bear Mountains, in the winter. So we got a very strong feelings and energies that we're going to do a great thing. I think the Yellow Earth, you probably could see this film, to understand this film, on many layers. Basically, I think it's quite symbolic. I must say that, basically, even before the Cultural Revolution, China was agricultural society. So you see that, in a very isolated piece of land, the peasants, the whole family survived there. But the girl really want to go out. So I think this is the voice of reform. This voice is being heard by the whole nation. That, after Cultural Revolution, everybody realized that it's time to change. So we cannot, stand this anymore. So that's why there is economic reform movement. And so that's why, at that time, there's a film called Yellow Earth came out. Not because that, I was great or a talent or something, I just hearing the voice of certain time, that's how we did this. Is we spending 3 months in the very remote area, place that we really enjoyed shooting every single day. We discovered a lot of things that we didn't even know before. The way that the peasants, how they live. And so on and so forth. I think it's a very unique experience that we had during the time shooting Yellow Earth.
One question, too, about the circumstances is that the fifth generation filmmakers, including yourself, worked for a smaller regional studio. And I always had the impression that you got to work in considerable isolation. There wasn't a lot of looking over your shoulder. There weren't any limousines outside the studio. It was a very privileged but remote circumstance that the studio itself was involved in. Where the fourth generation filmmakers tend to stay, we might say, on the East Coast studios. Is that the case?
Yes and no. Because, we want to be wild. We don't really like, the producers, stay behind of us and tell us what to do. So that's why we'll never, ever accept, the system in Hollywood. It's so hard for us to, for example, if I want to change one line, they would say, no, you can't change anything. Then I would say, how come that? This is not the way that I'm comfortable with. Because in China, I guess that the directors always have rights to change the things they want to change, the way that they want, which is great, and because things are changing every day, but you could have felt like, the time to change certain things. Let me tell you, for Yellow Earth, the total budget is a little bit less than $50,000 US. How come that? With 2 cars only, one van and 1 car, one camera. So the camera, actually, that car is for the camera crew. Mm-hmm. The way they carry, they just put the camera on their legs, like that, and go. Easy, to do the company move. But if you want to do that in Hollywood, they would say, hey, we're not scheduled to do that. Forget about that.
We have to call 6 different unions.
Exactly. So, you see that, this is a really, I must say, it's a very sort of joyful experience that to do Yellow Earth, is fantastic.
I want to come back to that. I'm actually going to try to bring Chen Biqiang into the conversation here. We've heard about the archive a number of times already, and its role in really forming the identities of the 4th and 5th generation filmmakers. I'd love to hear you to kind of comment on that and sort of express the ideas about how this formation took place and what the archive's role is and continuing role even in sort of defining or speaking about these 2 generations of filmmakers.
Well, the 2 generations between 4th and 5th, the key word is before and after the Great Cultural Revolution. And the 5th, more younger, and they have more courage to show and discover himself, not escape from himself. So they want to do something to evidence, show himself, show the exist of the generation and the individual and the personality. Yeah.
I see, very interesting. And I know you're interested, right now there's a great deal of oral history work that's occurring. Is it related to this period, mostly at this point, and have there been any discoveries that would shed light on this conversation?
Yeah, we did oral history from 2007, and we want to listen and to the
So we want to preserve.
Yeah, we want to preserve the older generations, the history, to show that the other younger generations. Yeah.
Fantastic. That's a wonderful project. Are we going to be able to experience it? Is it becoming a website or a book at some point?
Yeah, we published some books. Exactly, we get the foundations. We'll publish 30 books.
Wow.
In 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perhaps University of Toronto Press would like to translate 1 or 2 of them?
Yeah, I have no idea. They must be asked my boss.
Thank you very much. And feel free as we continue to discuss the 4th and 5th generation. One of the notable things also, maybe before we move back to the filmmakers, when I visited Beijing, there's a People's Liberation Army group that actually guards the archive. And one of the things that always surprised me was that the archive was not destroyed. during the Cultural Revolution period, or even significantly altered, even with all the turmoil within the army, even itself, that would have been in Beijing and guarding it. Can you shed any light on what happened during that time, and how the archive survived?
在几个时代吧，那段时间呢，就是说，资料馆呢是专门由解放军去这个守卫的，而且尽管文革发生了很多问题，这个很多事件，而且军队内部也有很多事件，但是这个文史馆保存的一直都很好。这个能不能讲一下这个文史馆这个保存过程是怎么样的，保存至今的？这个是怎么样做的？
It's a big question.
In the cultural revolution, the time the China Film Archive is disappeared, and they combine into the Chinese Film Company. Yeah. Because we have some films to the leadership, so Premier Zhou,
Enlai.
yeah, Premier Zhou Enlai, who 指示
So he gave the order.
yeah, gave order the soldiers to keep the film archive, the boat.
Oh, really? So Zhou Enlai basically made a rule to protect the archive.
But I think Madame Mao like watch film. Madame Mao is is a film star. They always ask some people go from Hong Kong, take some new film prints, come to China. It's Jiang Qing want to saw film, because every film crew,
However, it's saved. It's okay, but
shoot
it's good.
Beijing her film model films before she gives some foreign films. The color like that, the style like that. She always give a lot of orders. I think only some people like Madame Mao can watch foreign film that time from a film archive.
But it allowed for the archive to be preserved. It's fascinating. So hold on. So would she show you films while you were making the model operas in the 1970s as a model for making those films? So curious. Do you remember what films they were at all?
Yeah, that time with his father, 杜鹃山，什么？
他说想问您呢，就是说您在拍样板戏电影的时候，给您看。
就是那个 I say Chinese， 那个杜鹃山里头那个女主角要穿一个藕荷色的衣服，当时
So the main female character, the female lead in Du Juanshan, need to wear a lilac outfit.
于是江青就给了一部墨西哥的电影叫《冷酷的心》。
So there's
里头那个藕荷色就是要那个颜色。
So Madam Jiangqing pointed out to a Mexican film that's called the Cool Heart or the Cold Heart, and said that the lilac color has to be that dress's color.
我记得我们导演组和摄影师到市场上买了好几块藕荷色的布，把它排完了跟那个片子对比，成不成？
So they went to the market and got several different kind of lilac fabrics, and then put it all together and had to choose which lilac is the closest to that one.
To the Mexican film. Bart, any idea the Cold Heart? What that might be?
No, this is a new one for me.
Okay.
I was expecting, you know.
Los Olvidados or something. Or,
No, I was actually expecting a Manelli film.
Right.
Popped out of the
For color.
archive. Yeah. Meet me in St. Louis or some such. This is now a research project for, you know.
Exactly. Graduate students, anyone? Okay. That's fascinating. And so, was there any, I guess the question is that, were there any films, though, that were lost during that period that then the archive had to find again? after the Cultural Revolution was over?
I'm growing up the revolution, so I can't and I dare not learn English. So I'm English. My English
You're doing great.
is very bad. So I speak Chinese.
No problem.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
我们这文革当中丢失的影片其实很少，因为有解放军在那保护。我们丢失的这个影片就是早期的影片，是在1949年丢失的影片比较多一点，就文革以后其实没有丢。对。
Actually, the film that got lost during the Cultural Revolution is not that many, because there were the army guarding the archive, but there were a lot of film that was lost that actually was before the revolution. So during the pre-revolution period, a lot of film was lost.
So pre-1949 or
Yeah. 实际上，在文化大革命当中，中国资料馆的这个收藏还大大的丰富了。因为文化大革命，它是打破了一切关系，中国资料馆合并到了中国电影公司，所以中国电影资料馆的就电影公司下面的这个资料组，能够在各个省电影公司、市电影公司来收集所有资料馆原来没有收藏的影片。实际上，就是文化大革命当中，不仅没有丢失，反而丰富了中国电影资料馆的馆藏。
As a matter of fact, not only we didn't lose any material for our archive during the Cultural Revolution, we actually gained a lot of material because of the changes, because we were put into the film company. So then we are part of the film company system, so we have direct access to the provincial film companies and different local studios. So all those material can then get into the archive. So actually during the Cultural Revolution, in terms of materials, we actually got a lot of additional material.
It's fascinating. Thank you. That's incredible insight. The other thing that has come up in certain reading I've done is that one of the films that was sort of rediscovered after the Cultural Revolution and really championed by the China Film Archive was, of course, one of the big films in our program, Fei Mu's Spring in a Small Town. I've read in interviews with Zhang Yimou. I don't think I've read interviews with you, but that the fifth generation was actually shown it. You all watched it together, because I'm not sure whether your generation would have actually seen the film prior to the Cultural Revolution. And it was this wonderful revelation that a film like this could have been made in China in the 1940s. What kind of impact did that film have? Either Kaige or Qiefei?
就像小城之春这样的电影，当时那个小城之春这种电影，在我们上学的时候是评价很低的，认为它不是革命电影，我们都没看过。
As a matter of fact, that film, during the time when I was in school, the critical acclaim of that was actually quite low because it's considered not particularly revolutionary. So we never get to see them.
但是到了文革后，先是香港的电影人对他评价很高，我们才再看这个电影。
And it was after the Cultural Revolution that we then be able to hear that in Hong Kong the critics had given it a very high opinion, and that's when we actually got back to look at it.
但是中国电影资料馆它有很多收藏，所以这些片子包括费穆的片子。但是有一些是从海外找，包括孔夫子是香港电影资料馆，他们从海外找到的，大陆已经没有。
And so there are still a lot of those films in the archive in China, such as a lot of films by Fei Mu. But then there's other films such as Confucius, and that's only in the archive in Hong Kong that we actually have to get that from Hong Kong.
That film has only been restored for about the last 3 years. It's kind of a rediscovery. I did have this raises a question about whether or not when the Film Academy reopens and your students there, whether or not the period between the end of the war with Japan and the revolution in 1949, which is commonly now regarded, at least among Western critics, as a second golden age of Chinese cinema, whether or not you felt a kind of need to re-examine that and re-evaluate those films generally, besides Springtime in a Small Town, if that period was a kind of touchstone for you.
Yes， 就是现在看就是45年以后到49年，上海呢出了一片非常好的电影，包括有一些第三代导演，像一个郑君里，其实他最好的片子是《一江春水向东流》和《乌鸦与麻雀》，都是那个时候拍的。
So yeah, there are a lot of films done between 1945 to 1949, and a lot of film done in Shanghai. One of the third generation director, Zheng Junli, he did two of his really great films, the River Flowing East,
Spring River Flows East, yeah.
and the Sparrow and the Crow.
Crows and Sparrows.
解放以后，他是很天才的一个导演。但是呢，在社会主义时期拍的几个电影，现在都比较难，就价值就不高。
He's a very talented director, but after moving into the socialist era, the film that he then directed seemed to has less artistic value.
Interesting. 他在文革中间去世。
And he passed away during the Cultural Revolution.
Chen Kaige, was there any, when you were watching films, were there any Chinese films from the past that really had an impact on you and your colleagues in the academy at the time? Not really?
Well, I mean,
total break.
No, I must say that I've seen some, the Chinese movies made in the 30s and 40s. But you don't forget that, I mean, many movies made in 30s and 40s, particularly in the 30s, that are made in the foreign settlement. So that means that, only there that you could have the freedom to do the things you want to do. Because during the period of time that we grew up, we always believed that, you should make a film about the change of the society, for example. That you should focus on the collective, never really pay close attention to the individual's life. But if you look at the movies made in the 30s and 40s, you realize that it's wrong. I mean, we actually had that kind of tradition that to focus on the human beings. I mean, the personal life. Probably using the personal life to reflect, the social change and so on. Not directly to tell people that how great this socialism is, then could change people's life. This is always the argument, so that's why, I was saying last night that, even for the Pharaoh concubine, you see that this man, went through a different period of time, but, my interest is still just focus on his own life, as an individual, but not really about social change, I think what really impressed me, from the movies made in 30s and 40s is just like that.
Just focus on the individual human stories and their triumphs and daily needs. I'm about to turn over to questions, but Bart, I was wondering if you had anything else you wanted to engage in before we did so.
I was thinking that, because I'm the one who brought up the idea of a radical break with Yellow Earth, but as we discuss this, the question at least comes up about the way in which the fourth and fifth generation filmmakers remade certain moments in the tradition of Chinese cinema, appropriated them for themselves, even if they didn't imitate the films in terms of technique or particular stories, but they saw in them a morality, an ethics, an aesthetic attitude that was valuable to them. Now, this is an important issue for the fifth generation films because as soon as they appeared, they were accused of, in a sense, carrying the Western poison into Chinese cinema, that their aesthetics were modernist aesthetics imported from the West, that they were reading Christian Metz over at the Film Academy, and that these were that in a sense these films were too foreign, too sophisticated, and really were a break with tradition in this respect, but were fueled, we might say, by a kind of impulse to impress the Western eye. We could come back to this in a little bit. But that's why the question of how one related to the films of the 45 to 49 period is a poignant question, because of the impulses of a film like Yellow Earth, and I think even more powerfully, a film that is in the program, and I recommend, you might say, above all others, King of the Children, where many of these issues are articulated in an indirect but very powerful way. That the Chinese filmmakers, after the Cultural Revolution, begin to remake their tradition, to reinvent a tradition within Chinese film as, in a sense, an inspiration for their own work. I would just ask if you'd reflect on such a pretentious claim on my part.
You want to field that one, Kaige?
Well, I mean, everything is, so we have learned, we learn from life. Because that, we were told and we were taught before Cultural Revolution that, the society we used to live in was perfect. Life was perfect, the system was perfect, and so on. We kept that, keeping that sinking into probably after Marshall Bell died. So then the whole generation of mine realized that something went wrong. How come that, Marshall Bell, was the close friend of Chairman Mao, and all of a sudden he became a traitor? What really happened?
In the early 70s, right?
Yeah. So at that time that I was a soldier, I was shocked to know that, there's aircraft that crashed and he died. So I think that's the turning point, for the younger generation in China, that to realize that the whole thing went wrong. Then we try to figure it out, what's really happened. What's really happened inside of the traditions, their culture, and so on. Just now you're mentioning the King of Children, because I was in that province for many years. So you see that, the stories are very simple, the re-educated youth, being become a teacher in the teaching in the school, something like that. But I think that we're sort of bondaged by our own culture, and we don't know why people need to receive the education. So, the education would help you to be a real independent person, or the education just to give you something differently, like, you must be very faithful to what you're told, and you must be listen all the time, obey to teachers and parents and the whole society. I think that we asking a lot of questions. There are a lot of question marks in our early films regarding what's going on in the society and why things happen like that. Why so many people got a huge problem during the Cultural Revolution and so on and so forth. So I think this life itself, taught us to ask questions.
I think at this stage, if there's anyone in the audience who'd like to jump in with any questions, our panelists would love to hear from you. And we'll need to borrow 2 mics from the stage for that, so start with Bart's, and we'll pass them around, perhaps the translator. Great, thank you. So in the front here, the lady in the white sweater, please.
Hi, it's 这是一个给陈凯歌导演的问题。It's been 10 years since you made 霸王别姬, so I'm just wondering how much do you think the audience have changed over the last 10 years, and how does this change influence your work, and in the as movies in the future that you will make?
Good question. Actually, I think the general situation in China has completely changed in the last 2 decades that regarding the filmmaking, the film market, and so on. Let me tell you that, when we start to make films, that if you walk into the theater, you would realize that, the most audience are sort of middle-aged people. They come, they treat the theater like a church. They're sitting in the dark, they want to listen to what the people say on the screen, and they want to learn things from them. So, I'm not saying that they're happy to receive education in terms of how to live or something like that, but they feel this is art. Okay, cinema is art. Cinema can be a religion that we could learn things. Sitting there like everybody just sitting in the dark and pray together. But now, if you walk into the theater in China, let me tell you that people are so proud to tell us that, see that now we have 15,000 screens in China, and in 10 years' time, the number of the print will be doubled. Something like that. But sitting in the dark to watch the film is no longer middle-aged people. If you lined up, you see that the people lined up outside of the theater. If you see someone in the middle of 30s, people would give him very strange look. Why you are here? So the audience are under 20s. They were born, in the 90s or something like that. With their young lovers and friends and so on. So, with popcorns and the Cokes and the sitting there and being very noisy. And just, they don't care what is that on the screen. What they care is that whether they can make themselves excited. Right? That's the reason why they watch the film. I'm not saying that it's a bad thing. It's a great thing. Because finally the Chinese audience learn how to enjoy the entertainment, right? And they try to be relaxed. Rather than to be serious or having the tears on their faces. This is great. I'm not saying this is a bad thing.
Do you think that as a result, like a Yellow Earth or a Black Snow would be impossible to deliver to an audience today?
And the young audience laughing all the time without any reason. Maybe because that they want to be happy, But as the director, like my teacher, Professor Xie Mei, and we got confused what we can provide to those young audience. So, but we learn. Professor Xie just now, he said that he just don't want to continue to make a film. He now is teaching. But for me, that I still have ambitious, to continue my career. I need to make more films in the future. But what I'm going to do, this is a huge question mark for myself, But I believe that I can survive. I could find a way to make a balance, let people understand my film, even better than before. I don't know. But I think the whole thing is very exciting. When you're facing a huge change like this, China soon. Look at that. In the last 3 decades, that China has become the second biggest film market in the world. And how come? What really happened? No one can give a specific answer, but this is the reality. I'm happy that it's more people coming into the theater, with good reason or bad reason, whatever, But this is the thing that.
And I guess even when films came back on screen, the cost. Well, I think during Cultural Revolution there was no cost to see movies, but even after, tickets were incredibly cheap. And I think now in the cities in China, it's more expensive to see a movie now than in New York City or Paris, right? So people really want to go. Next question. We got one on the side here.
Hi.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Please.
我要请翻译一下。我就很荣幸的今天能够见到中国来的几位电影界的名人，我就想要了解一下中国百年近代的电影跟西方的电影目前差距在什么地方？另外，从电影的文化、电影的这个艺术和电影的制作，再加上思想内容和社会很多的这些在内，还有哪些差距？这是第一个问题。第二个问题，我就想了解一下，就是说，在两岸三地之间的差异在什么地方？希望这几位名人给我们一些评价。谢谢。
So the question is, well, there are two questions. The first one is, she's very excited to see the celebrity filmmakers, and so she likes to know, especially in the context of 100 years in the Chinese films, what do you think now the main differences are between Chinese film and Western films? And also, the second question is, what are the main differences between the three areas, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and China, in terms of their characteristics in their filmmaking?
Who wants to start us off? Maybe, do you want to... actually, I'd love to hear from the filmmakers first, and maybe, Bart, if you'd like to actually provide a little context after, it'd be great. Xie
Yeah. I speak Chinese. 其实任何中国电影的电影人，有搞艺术片的，什么样的人才都有。其实我认为现在跟西方最大的差距就是我们的市场机制还没有建立，我们现在还是个半市场机制的电影业，我们政府还在控制审查，还控制垄断一些东西，电影电视。所以这个体制上是完全束缚了电影的发展，所以我在去年提出了要用分级来代替审查，都很同意，但是想实行非常难。
Actually, in terms of styles, there are many, many talented directors in China doing very different things, very artistic things, commercial things, very different styles. So it's not so much about what the filmmakers are doing that's different from the West, but rather the system itself. The film market is still not very much a commercial market. It's sort of in between. So there's still censorship. There's still a lot of control. So I had raised the issue of changing the censoring system to a rating system, which had received a lot of agreement, but to actually implement that is not happening at any time soon. So it's more of the system that creates limitation and a system that creates the way the film it is now.
Very interesting. Chen Kaige, I'm very interested in your answer to this question because, of course, many of your most famous films involve collaborators and key producer from Taiwan, collaborators from Hong Kong, and of course, you've actually made films in Hollywood as well. So the two-part question actually is actually a very interesting question just about your career and collaborative practice in a funny way.
Well, I really don't know. I mean, I want to tell you that, I mean, the Taiwan cinema is quite independent. Taiwan filmmakers, they just work in Taiwan mostly. That, you can see that the Taiwan cinema cannot really grow very bigger but you could see some interesting quality films are made in Taiwan every single year. But Hong Kong is a different issue. You know that the Hong Kong people can be very realistic, meaning that since the Chinese market's growing very big, so they all come to China and work there. They're making some Hong Kong audience just complain. When I was in Hong Kong not very long time ago, they say that we hardly to see real Hong Kong movies now. The most movies that are actually made for the mainland Chinese audience, right? But for those Hong Kong directors, they may not really know enough about China, about that society, about what people want to see there. But because that they have their professional skills and they understand, general rules of how to make commercial films. So that's why they have done many things in China. They used China as a location to shoot their films. Basically for the Chinese audience. Some of them, have done great, but some of them just survive. They can't. They can't really do very well. This is a sort of very confusing situation. I think that a lot of Hong Kong directors will continue to work in mainland, for sure.
Yeah. And in terms of Chinese filmmaking practice versus Western filmmaking practice, I think you alluded to Hollywood not changing one word in a script, but are there other differences that you'd point out to the questioner? Biqiang.
Okay. 中国电影和I speak Chinese too. 中国电影和西方电影的一个最重要的区别，可能还是一个文化上的一个区别，因为中国电影是随着中国社会的转型而转型的，现在正在转型的这个迷惘的这样一个时期。
So I think the biggest difference between Chinese film and Western film is it's a cultural difference. So the Chinese film at the moment, or the Chinese film had came to its present state through social changes. So movie changes, the way of making movie changes as society changes. So right now it's at a rather confusing state. So that is where it is now.
我还补充一下刚才就第4代和第5代的这个讨论，因为刚才英文表达实在是不能够完全表达我自己。第4代和第5代的这种差别也是文化转型的一个开始，因为第4代它是我们的表达是思考是以我们作为基本单位的，它表达自我的这样一个勇气和方式都在形成当中。第5代前进了一步，就是从小我，就是从我们走到了大我。虽然也不是一个个人自我，是一个大我的这样一个状态。他们也说别人的故事，但是他们这个方式上和他的情感上和思想上表达导演个人的这样一个特点，会比第4代更加明确一点。
There's one point that I want to add for earlier point between the difference between the 5th and the 4th generation. Earlier, I really didn't get a chance to express it so clearly in English. So the main difference, as far as I see it, is that the 4th generation directors are expressing things from a viewpoint of us. So it is us who observe this and us. So the viewpoint is us. And the 5th generation went a step further, and it's self, but as a bigger self. It's still not an ordinary individual kind of a self. They're still telling quite often other people's story, but it became a one single person, but a bigger one person.
So kind of a move from storytelling of individuals within a collective trauma to more spotlighting the individual stories themselves afterwards. Yeah, that does rhyme very nicely with, I think, what's been spoken in the panel, and very eloquent. Thank you. Bart, do you have any other thoughts on this?
Thank you.
Sorry for this merry-go-round. We'll get more mics next time.
One thing we haven't discussed is that when the fourth and fifth generation films come, they're sort of the only game in town. It takes a while for the Chinese cinema following the Cultural Revolution to ramp up, and therefore it's pretty convenient and not entirely inaccurate to speak about these filmmakers as Chinese cinema, mainland Chinese cinema. Now, I believe that there were more directors ready to go among the fourth generation and that they made more films and the films were pretty popular. The fifth generation started more slowly, there were fewer filmmakers, and their films were, for the most part, not very popular. They were very prestigious abroad, but they weren't so popular at home. But the fourth generation did pretty well at restarting narrative filmmaking in China. And I guess I should ask, could that be fact-checked before we go on? But as time goes on, the Chinese cinema becomes quite varied. And I'm not sure if the situation is totally confused, just not very well understood. And you see, that's a difference. In other words, that there are different kinds of films made for different purposes. Like the main melody films are pretty much semi-government issue to affirm certain programs and attitudes. Other films are actually kind of underground, even though they're widely circulated, and then you can multiply. It seems to me that the Chinese films that we get to see are sophisticated versions of our better Hollywood films, the Steven Spielbergs. Not quite so expensive or elaborate, but they're pretty spectacular, they're pretty strong. Films like Assembly and Aftershock, etc.
Banquet, maybe.
Yeah, I think that those films would be the big investment films that the Chinese film industry would like to see us see as Chinese films, for better or for worse. And they are pretty successful. They're very successful at home. They pay back their investment at home, which wasn't possible as recently as, for example, Hero. When Zhang Yimou made Hero, he really needed to have a foreign success to make sure he could pay back the investment of that film. Now the audience in China going to the movies is big enough so that they can be pretty sure of domestic repayment of often pretty hefty investment. And that seems to me to make the Chinese mainland cinema seem more and more like the American cinema.
Interesting. Yeah, which relies on foreign sales more and more.
But also that Americans don't make films unless they expect to make back the money on every film, or most films, and indeed in the domestic market. And the Chinese are doing that. Whereas when we think about Chinese cinema in the era of the fourth and fifth generation, we think of it much more like a European art cinema model where the films are heavily subsidized. Their success at the box office has to do with issues of whether or not they are politically or spiritually or aesthetically any good, rather than whether or not they make back their money. Okay, but the situation has very much changed, and so, in a sense, the moment of a fourth or fifth or even sixth generation is in a way slipping away for these commercial reasons.
And in fact, I think you find when you speak to the so-called sixth generation, they're extremely uncomfortable, in fact, reject the idea of being a generation entirely in a way that maybe Xie and Chen Kaige have some discomfort, but more or less acknowledge that there's something there. So yeah, and who knows if they'll actually then either there'll be a seventh generation. We have time for one or two more. Does anyone have a mic in their hands now? Yep, right there.
First, I just wanted to say thank you for such an informative and inspiring panel. I'm very happy to be here. And I hope that you can speak a little bit about the experiences of women filmmakers from the fourth and fifth generation, if there are particular obstacles or accomplishments that we haven't heard about yet. I realize none of you are women filmmakers, but if you could just speak a bit about that group.
Maybe Chen Biqiang can start us off with this.
I'm sorry, I don't know really. Please direct Chen Kaige.
So, Xie, you want to start us off?
这个4代5代里头，其实女导演都很多，而且也很成功，可能跟49年以后毛泽东提出妇女半边天、妇女解放有很大的关系。
There are actually quite a number of female directors in the fourth and the fifth generation directors, and that could possibly be a tribute to after 1949, Chairman Mao had emphasis on the fact that women should hold up half of the sky. So there were a lot of them.
像我们第4代里头这次也放一个青春记的张乃馨，就是我们女导演里非常杰出的。
For example, one of the films that's being shown here is
Sacrifice Youth.
The Sacrifice Youth, and that director, she's a very accomplished director.
而且他的凯歌的同学，第5代的女导演也很强。现在我们导演协会的会长李少红，是个女的。
And one of the classmates of Mr. Chen Kaige, which is now the president of the Director Association, Miss Li Xiaohong, that's a female director.
她的电影这次也放，就是《血色清晨》吧。
She also has a film show here.
Bloody Morning.
It's called Bloody Morning.
Extremely interesting movie. I'd recommend everyone should see it. Fascinating film. Yeah, it's actually interesting. When we went through the program, what was interesting is that I wouldn't say, as opposed to the West, where there's particularly in the 60s and 70s a distinct women's cinema. The women directors in China were playing with the boys, so the same kinds of aesthetic experimentation, the same kind of challenges, and often similar parallel solutions were being made by women filmmakers and men filmmakers side by side. So you'll see in a film like Bloody Morning, Li Xiaohong's, is that it's approaching the idea of the village, approaching the idea of how one tells a story about that place in the countryside, in a different, while using a different formal structure, but kind of addressing the same concerns, say that Kaige was in Yellow Earth. So it's funny. It's just a sort of a different matter. I don't know, Bart, if you have anything to add on that. Okay. One more question, I think we have.
Thank you for this special guest for this fabulous panel discussion. I have a question. Actually, two questions. So, first question is for director Chen Kaige. Over the course of your filming career, I really like all of your films, like from early from Red Soren and then Farewell My Concubine, and also the recent films. My question is for you: is that what has influenced you to make these changes over the course of your filming career, and also what is your insight of your future filming after you made Caught in the Web? And also my second question is for the panel. What do you think, what do you say about the future of Chinese cinema? Because contemporary Chinese cinema is very complex, and filmmakers fifth and sixth generation, they are kind of intertwined. They make documentaries and some commercials at the same time. I'm just wondering what you guys think about what Chinese cinema will go in the future. Thank you.
So I guess we'll start with you, Kaige, and the series of questions he had about there's breaks in your cinema that I think it's funny, we talked about it a bit last night, that Farewell My Concubine function is a kind of a break forward for you. Then I think with Emperor and the Assassin, we're actually rehearsing tonight's in conversation with right now, but then there's and with the martial arts stuff a little bit later as well. So if you'd like to address it.
Well, it's really hard to answer that. I think that, as I said, that the situation of filmmaking in China is completely changed. It's out of imagination when we start to make films that we always work with the government-run studios. But now that those studios are completely dead, you could only work with the private companies. You could raise money on your own. And of course, that as a film director, you have to make sure that you can get money back, which is bad for us. This is not our job, but you have to do this. And I pay a close attention to what's going on in the society. So that's why, I could make the film like Caught in the Web. So people will say that you only want to make historical pieces, the custom dramas and so on. I say no. The reason why I want to do this in the past, because I think that people are actually losing sense of that, what kind of culture that we had in the past. So I just try to emphasize that how important to learn things continually, from our traditional culture. But I live today. Of course that, I've been very sensitive regarding, what's going on. And more or less that I must say that a website is a great thing, that the people probably find a way to express themselves on website. But at the same time, we just to keep our tradition, that we always try to find somebody they don't like, people don't like, and to tag, him or her, and those people sort of are being tortured on website, and I think this is another cultural revolution. I really think so.
Really?
Yeah. So that's why there is a Caught in the Web. I really hope that I can be very close to the ordinary people who are suffering because of the change that is too big and too fast, and many people in China are not really comfortable with those changes. And they in the past, although that they suffered poverty, but at the same time they feel like someone could take care of them financially. But now that you have to do everything on your own, so that's the thing.
So do you see in the future that you might go back and forth between more historically minded films and more contemporary films?
I don't know. I'm waiting for the time to come, then we can create something that the people will really enjoy. Meaning that we are waiting for the time to come to continue to make important films.
Right.
That's the word. I don't know. I like commercial films. I love to, sit with the audience to see the film. When they're laughing, I'm laughing. This is great. But I hope that, when we realize the importance that, how the filmmaker could bring the happiness to the audience. At the same time, don't forget that China is a huge country with a long history. We are asked by the audience and by ourselves that to continue to make quality films.
That's great. Thank you. Would you like to add something?
Yes. Talk about the future. I always...
From the teacher.
I'm a teacher, always answer this question. Somebody said we all talk about fourth generation, fifth generation, sixth generation. Where is the seventh generation? I told them, when filmmaker can free shoot film about Lin Biao, about Jiang Qin, that time, seventh generation come. Because I need society change. But I don't like our generation, our two generations have a revolution and some war experience. I don't like that. I hope reform, step by step, peace reform. I hope in future in China have some society reform, political reform. If that time, new film generation will become. China film industry have a very good future. We need wit. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very... I think on those inspirational comments, we're probably good to wrap up. Thank you so much to my panelists, Chen Biqiang, Bart Testa, Chen Kaige, Xie Fei. Thank you all very much.